She had always believed kindness could change the world, but fate tested that belief one stormy night on the edge of an empty highway. Her wallet held a single crumpled dollar, the last bit of faith she had left. Then she saw him, a biker stranded in the rain, covered in mud, desperate for help. She didn't know the color of his skin would decide how the world saw them both, or that by sunrise, her act of compassion would ignite a chain of events reaching far beyond that roadside. What began as mercy would soon expose something much darker, something money, power, or even faith might never fix.
Ruth wasn't a woman who asked for much. She worked the late shift at a diner off Highway 19, serving coffee, counting tips, and dreaming that someday life might feel a little lighter. Her world was small but honest, peeling paint on her apartment walls, secondhand shoes, and a faith that tomorrow would somehow be kinder. That night, though, the world felt heavier. The rain hadn't stopped for hours, and she was down to one last dollar after paying rent. She tucked it carefully into her pocket, hoping it might stretch far enough for breakfast. As she drove home, headlights blurred against the downpour. Then, through the curtain of rain, she saw a motorcycle tipped beside the road, its rider standing alone, drenched and waving for help. Ruth slowed instinctively. Something deep inside whispered the stopping might be a mistake, but another voice, the one that still believed in doing right, told her she couldn't just drive by. She didn't yet know that what waited on that dark stretch of highway wasn't just a stranded man. It was the moment her quiet life would collide with the truth far uglier than poverty, a truth that would test not only her kindness, but the color of it.
The man by the road was shivering, his motorcycle lying half in a ditch. Ruth rolled down her window and shouted through the rain, asking if he was hurt. He looked startled, almost afraid, before nodding. She could see now that his skin was dark, and for a heartbeat she hesitated, not from prejudice, but from memory, the way the world sometimes twisted acts of kindness when color got involved. Still, she stepped out, umbrella trembling in the wind, and pressed that last crumpled dollar into his hand. He thanked her softly, his voice rough with gratitude, insisting she didn't need to help. But she stayed long enough to call for a tow truck and make sure he was safe. When she finally drove away, she couldn't shake the strange mixture of worry and relief. It wasn't until the flashing blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror that her heart truly began to pound. The officer didn't explain why she'd been pulled over. He just asked where she'd been and who she'd been talking to on the roadside. His eyes narrowed when she stammered about helping a biker. The rain ran down her face like tears as he searched her car without asking, muttering about suspicious activity. Behind him, another patrol car slowed, 2 officers now, radios crackling. They didn't see Ruth's kindness. They saw a white woman and assumed danger in the man she'd helped. Within hours, gossip had spread around the diner how Ruth had been seen with one of them on the highway. People whispered that she was reckless, maybe mixed up in something criminal. Her coworkers avoided her booth. Even her landlord left a note on her door about keeping better company. The next morning, the story was everywhere online. A woman helps a biker wanted and questioned for theft. The photo wasn't flattering. Ruth standing beside the man, blurred through rain, looking guilty when she'd only been tired. She tried explaining that the man hadn't done anything wrong, that he'd simply run out of gas. No one listened. The more she tried to defend him, the more people turned that quiet hostility toward her. Somewhere in all the noise, Ruth realized this wasn't just about her kindness. It was about the race of the man she'd chosen to help. By the 3rd day, her manager told her it was best she take some time off. Bills piled up, and the phone stopped ringing except for anonymous calls that spat hate through the receiver. She started doubting herself. Had she been foolish to stop? Then she saw a headline that made her freeze. biker identified, local philanthropist and CEO known for anonymous charity acts. The face in the article was the stranger she'd helped. The man everyone had feared wasn't a criminal at all. He was a billionaire traveling incognito, testing whether compassion still existed in strangers. Ruth read that line over and over. The story was no longer just about a woman who stopped to help. It was about all those who judged her for the color of the man she'd helped. And the twist waiting at her doorstep would make the world finally look at itself in the mirror.
By the time Ruth opened her door that morning, the whispers had turned into something uglier. Spray-painted words scarred her apartment door. Slurs, threats, accusations. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe them away, but the paint only smeared into red streaks that looked too much like blood. She was exhausted. 3 nights without sleep, no job, no peace, just the echo of her own conscience asking if doing good had ever been worth it. Then came the knock. Slow, heavy, too deliberate to be friendly. She froze, heart hammering. For a moment she thought it was more hatred, someone come to finish what the words had started. But when she opened the door, the man from the rain stood there, clean-shaven now, wearing a tailored coat. Behind him gleamed a black car that didn't belong on her cracked street. The same man the world had condemned as a suspicious biker, now revealed in headlines as a billionaire philanthropist. His presence seemed to drain the noise from the air. He didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. The look on his face carried apology, sorrow, and something deeper, understanding. He held a photo in his hand, Ruth standing in the storm, reaching out to help him. Compassion, the newspaper headline beneath it read, still exists. As neighbors peeked through curtains, Ruth felt the unbearable weight of the past day closing in. The crowd that had painted her as naive or guilty was now silent, caught in the whiplash of revelation. Ruth's kindness had been judged, twisted, punished, and now witnessed. The same world that had mocked her was forced to watch her be seen. For the first time since that night, Ruth didn't feel small. She looked into the man's eyes, not as billionaire and waitress, not as black man and white woman, but as 2 people who had survived what fear tried to destroy. The story that started with a single act of kindness ended with headlines, apologies, and uncomfortable conversations Ruth never asked for. The billionaire offered her help, money, lawyers, public statements, but Ruth declined everything except the truth. She didn't want repair, she wanted reflection. The pain she carried wasn't just from the words painted on her door. It was from realizing how fast people turn their fears into judgments, how easily compassion was dismantled by color. The diner reopened to new customers weeks later, but the old regulars rarely looked her in the eye. Some avoided her, others forced apologies they didn't quite mean. Ruth noticed that silence carried its own weight, a different kind of shame, softer but still heavy. The man she helped launched a foundation in her name, dedicated to moments like theirs, to testing how deeply humanity still ran when labels disappeared. Still, Ruth never called herself brave. She'd say bravery didn't drive her that night, decency did. And if decency could cause this much upheaval, maybe the world needed to be shaken a little more often. Because what happened to Ruth wasn't an isolated incident. It was a mirror, a reflection of how suspicion shadows every act of connection in a divided world, how kindness across colors still feels radical when it should feel ordinary. In the end, the story wasn't about money or fame. It was about how quickly we choose sides before knowing the truth. Ruth's last words in her interview weren't rehearsed. She simply looked into the camera and asked, quietly, "If helping someone like him costs me everything, what does that say about us?" And somewhere in the silence that followed, the world had to decide whether it would keep watching or finally start changing.